Q&A afterwards. Thank you everybody for coming to this session. Julian, please.
All right. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
All right, welcome back. All right. Well, my name is Julian. Of course, I'm from Bakersfield College. I've been there for the last couple years. The main thing that I do over there is I work with African American students. I'm a part of an affinity group. I'm a data coach for that group. I'm an educational advisor for that group. I'm a program coordinator for that group as well. And I'll explain what all this is about, but I just want you to know where I'm coming from. I also do some part-time teaching as well. And of course, coming out here to speak with you guys. I go someplace to speak, so that's cool. So basically what I want to talk about today is how to infuse equity within a guided pathways model. Because I think all of the time, as we go through this guided pathways transition, we hear the word equity thrown out there quite a bit, right? But we don't always hear how to introduce equity within a guided pathways model. I think sometimes we assume that guided pathways is inherently equitable. I don't think it is. I think that it's a tool in order to reach that goal of achieving equity. And what I like to do in my presentations is get a little bit of participation, so I will ask some questions so we can also make it a discussion along the way. But I like to come at it from two different perspectives, right? Because I've seen two different perspectives on equity within guided pathways. There's that one perspective that is totally for guided pathways, all on board, and is ready for it, and believes that it will truly get us to where we're going. Now there's that other perspective that believes guided pathways will actually hinder equity, right? And there's valid points on both sides. I think Mustafa made a great point in addressing that guided pathways is essentially what you make it. It's nothing concrete. It's just a framework or a tool in order to get you to your intended goal. So I'm going to address both sides of that argument, and we'll go from there. So I think any campus transitioning into this guided pathways model, you have to address people's concerns. I know you spoke about a concern earlier. I think it's important to speak about these concerns. I don't think it's anything we should shy away from, because some of these concerns are justifiable, right? A lot of concerns that I hear in terms of equity within guided pathways, well, if we focus on the guided pathways model, won't that take away from focusing on equity, right? I know Luis was telling me that there are some schools that, now that they're going toward a guided pathways movement, that they're getting away from their Puente programs, or their Emoja programs, or their learning communities, wherever the case may be. Not that that's necessarily you guys, but that's something that is happening out there, right? Does raising the completion of all students address disparities, right? It's kind of a rising tide lifts all ships with the Meta-Majors concept in a way, right? If our students are barely passing now, how will putting them in more classes help? Look, I know that was my concern when this first came out. I can tell you, when Guided Pathways first came out, I was not a fan. Because a lot of the students that I work with, I was like, well, geez, I'm pulling teeth to get them to pass 12 units, and you're telling me to put them in 15 is the answer? I struggled with that, right? I struggled with that for a while. How will our low socioeconomic students take more units if they need to work, right? That's a valid concern. If you've got to work from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, how are you going to take more units? How's that going to work, right? So these are all justifiable concerns that we need to wrestle with, right? We need to address that and consider it going forward. Why is it important to address these issues? Because culture eats strategy for breakfast. Right? Right? You can have all the strategy in the world, but if your people aren't on board with that strategy, good luck, right? Good luck with that. Even for myself, I do educational plans for pretty much almost every African American student at my campus. If I don't believe that I should put them in 15 units, guess what I won't, right? And they're going to listen to me, and they're going to go with however many units I advise them to go in. So if I haven't bought into that strategy, I just won't do it, right? And that's the same thing with everybody else on campus. If faculty, counselors, etc. haven't bought into the strategy, they just won't do it, right? It'll just go by the wayside. So you have to not just implement a strategy, but you also have to have people believe in the strategy in order for it to work. Otherwise, this guided pathways thing is going nowhere, right? So I want to get into some discussion about equity versus high expectations, right? So what is equity? What would you guys define equity as? Anybody? What would you define equity as? Yeah, if you don't mind.
I guess I would say that equity is making sure that people have the opportunity and being able to extend support and resources in order to make sure that everyone is able to come up to an equal position. Absolutely.
Absolutely, right? I think you mentioned something of an equal position. I think that's the goal of equity, right? Is to get everybody to an equal playing field, right? I think equity is about also addressing those who are a little bit further behind, right? Not just those who are further behind, but those who also have unique needs, right? For example, you have veterans who might have unique needs, right? The counseling of veterans and the stuff they deal with coming back from war and the culture in which they're coming from, their needs might be a little more unique than your typical student, right? So I think equity, some people go right to gender and ethnicity when they think of equity, right? I think equity is a much more broader term. And there's other things that are included in that, besides ethnicity, gender, and low income, right? Like I said, veterans, they have unique needs. The LGBTQ community, they have unique needs. So I think there's a lot that goes into this concept of equity.
Julian,
Yes. Yes.
I'm just curious because the more of this work that we're doing statewide, I can't help but think in some ways the equity discussion has been about what's out in front of you, the other. And in some ways, I think the way we're trying to talk about equity is holding a mirror up and looking at ourselves. Because as someone said earlier, and I forget the gentleman who talked about the context under which we're living in right now. And some folks are feeling threatened physically with their lives because of who they are, who they love, how they act, or whatever, right? And so I always like to push this idea of equity, not just being about what's out there, like what type of person that we're trying to help, but what's my relationship to that person, to that community, to that experience. And I think that in that way, it's much more deeper engagement, because I think when you think of it as just other, then it's easier to just kind of compartmentalize it and say we're done with that discussion, let's move on.
Absolutely. Another question I have are, what are high expectations? When you hear high expectations at a community college, what comes to mind? What do you guys think? What do you think the high expectations are?
Well, for me, high expectations is a student's ability to be successful in targeting what they're trying to accomplish and looking at what they need to do within themselves and what skills they need to acquire in order to accomplish those goals. Obviously, from a math perspective, I'm a math teacher, but just in general, I look for high expectations of a student leading or developing the skills they need to undertake challenges and feel that they can overcome them, whether they don't have the skills up front, they know they can acquire them, whether they can look within themselves to see what their deficiencies are, and what they need to do to overcome those obstacles and those deficiencies to achieve their goals.
Right. I agree with that, right? It's right on target. High expectations, expecting students to accomplish their goals, expecting them to graduate from college, expecting them to do well, right? Having high expectations of our students. Another question, are these ideals competing, right? Now, I think a lot of times when we think of equity and we think of high expectations, we think of those two goals as something that's separate, something that's going in two separate directions, right? You can't both be, both a student who has equitable needs and also be on the honor roll, or also, make the dean's list. A lot of times this is our thought process. So the students who are coming underprepared, they can't then be expected to do college level work because that would be high expectations, right? I think a lot of times our expectations are a little bit lower of those students who have equitable needs. Does that make sense? A lot of times when we see students coming in underprepared, we don't necessarily expect them to be able to perform at the college level. Am I right about that?
To me, they seem the same, equity and high expectations. Because you're really looking at the individual and what they are looking for, what fulfills them, what will get them to a state of learning, of understanding what their goals are and meeting those goals. And that is the same thing with equity, the same thing with expectations to me.
He's right on target with that, right? And that is my point, is that you cannot have equity without high expectations. If your expectations are low, then how are you being equitable? What were you going to say?
So in my background's in student affairs, student services, and we always talked about meeting the student where they're at +1, right? So there's also that piece about, yes, we need to have high expectations, but when we know the challenge is already high, then we need to have high support as well. Otherwise, we're setting the bar so high, right, that it's not
a best practice that I adopt. It's the way that I see my students and interact with my students. And so the expectation is for me. The equity is within me, right? That I have to create those conditions for those students. So does what we believe affect how we teach or provide service? Absolutely yes, because the belief system drives the practice. And we teach from inside. How can those are mutually incompatible? So that's kind of my position.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the most important things, is addressing what we actually believe inside, because it's going to affect how we teach and how we provide service to students. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, we can admit that sometimes we see that student and our expectations might not be that high. I'm guilty of it myself, right? I had a student a few months ago who came in, he's got tattoos all over his face, right? Fresh out of prison. Well, when I see that, yeah, my expectations aren't the highest. Let's be honest, right? First thing I thought is, this guy might not make it, right? You have that impression because you know what the tattoos mean. You know that means gang. You know that means prison. And you know everything that comes behind that. So your expectations might not be the highest.
Or your expectations can be higher, because what did it take that student to get to your door? They had to overcome a lot more than your base first impression expectations lead you to believe. That's a student who is going to be a star. Because of how much they have overcome to get there and want to learn from you.
And that's what we need, right? We need to be able to shift our own perspectives, right? We need to be able to find a way to have those high expectations of all of our students. So in guided pathways, I think of high expectations as, what we hear all the time. Getting through college level English and math in the first year. That's a high expectation. For our students, yeah, that's a high expectation. Attempting 15 units by the end of the first semester, completing 30 units by the end of the first year, and completing 9 core pathway units in the first year. Those are high expectations, are they not? Right?
Doesn't those contradict the justifiable concerns slide that you put up previously?
Wait for the next one. It's going to blow your mind. And so, it does contradict, yeah, because there's two sides to every argument, right? I'm not sitting here trying to shove guided pathways down anybody's throat, right? That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to talk about both sides and come to the middle line and have everyone here and everyone across the state hopefully come to the middle line so we can serve our students in the best way in the interest of our students, right? But when you consider changing the culture from low expectations to high expectations, I want to just throw out some points. Students in high school are taking classes 8 hours per day, right? Now granted, not all of our students are fresh out of high school, but are all the students who are fresh out of high school taking 15 units per semester and completing 30 units per year? Definitely not at my campus, for sure, right? But they were just in school for much, much longer than what 15 units would account for, right? Students who transfer to attend school full-time, attend school full-time because of the cost, right? So if you transfer to a CSU or a UC, you better go to school full-time at that point, right? Because you're going to pay almost the same amount for a part-time degree anyway. Does that make sense? So when they transfer, well, they're going to go full-time because they have to. Although economically it doesn't make sense. They'll be more entrenched in debt if they don't, right?
Not necessarily if they're a CSU, they go part-time. If
What's
they're
that?
working and if they have a family, they can go part-time or pay part-time fees.
They can, yes, but it'll be, over the long run, it'll be more expensive because it's not incongruent with the amount of classes that they take. So if they take 2 classes instead of 4 classes, it's not going to be half the tuition. It's going to be pretty close to the full tuition. A little bit less, but pretty close. So it's not like community college, where most of our students don't pay really anything in tuition, and so it doesn't matter in that situation. But the four-year campuses, it's going to entrench them in more debt if they go full part-time. And what we actually noticed, which is interesting, because in Bakersfield, we did a study where we noticed that students who went part-time at BC, once they transferred to CSUB, most of them transferred to CSUB, of course, because it's local, they ended up going full-time, right? Because of that economic sense that it makes. A lot more can go wrong in a broader time frame, right? We know our students. Something comes up all the time. I always warn my students, I say, look, something bad is going to happen to you over the course of this year. I guarantee it. Be ready for it and be prepared for it, right? Because bad things happen to everybody all the time, every day, right? And we having gone through that process, might be a little more resilient when it comes to education, but our students aren't, right? They haven't developed that resiliency in a lot of cases, right? So when bad things happen, it can throw them off, right? And sometimes it can throw them way off. I've had students where they'll do good for 4 semesters in a row and they've just got 2 left, just 2 left. And then somebody dies. Somebody gets shot, right? Somebody gets broken up, right? That's a traumatic experience for a lot of our students when they lose a girlfriend or lose a boyfriend, right? That can cause them to shift off track, right? So there's a lot of things that can happen. I mean, I've seen it. Students get kicked out of the house. Students lose their job. Students lose a family member. All of these things affect our students. And more things can happen in a broader time frame, right? When we raise the standards for students, they raise the standards for themselves. I swear to you, this is true, right? Students will live up to what you expect of them. If you expect less of them, then they'll give you less, right? But if you expect more of them, and I've got some evidence of it, they'll end up rising to the occasion and they will give you more, right? Most often, students do not fail classes due to their ability to comprehend curriculum, right? And some of the factors, you guys can chime in on this, feel free. But I think a lot of times when students fail, they didn't turn in their assignments. They didn't come to class, right? I had a student call me this morning, he said, man, I didn't make it to class because my alarm clock didn't go off and I wasn't able to get there. I said, man, get your butt to class, you know? Because that's oftentimes why these students fail, is because they don't get to class. They don't turn in the assignment. It's not because they're in class studying hard and they're like, I just don't get it, and they go to tutoring and they're like, I just can't get it still. I mean, granted, that may happen on a rare occasion, but most of the time, I mean, come on. Students aren't going to class. That's why I failed. Students aren't turning in assignments, right? I've seen it time and time again. Now, I say all that, but I want to give a disclaimer, right? Because I've said this before, and then folks will say, well, you're just saying students should lift themselves up by their bootstraps. And what about the student who has a child who just graduated high school and whatnot? And that's true. We do have to consider that. So this isn't a one-size-fits-all type of deal here, right? I'm not saying every student is going to be able to complete English and math in the first year. I'm not saying every student is going to be able to take 15 units a semester. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of deal. And students come in many shapes and sizes. And to be honest with you, for some students, like you said, just getting to class, just taking one class at a community college is a high expectation. Because then they've got 3 kids at home and they've got a full-time job and they're trying to make it all work. So in some instances, they're already living up to high expectations just by making it to college. So this isn't a one-size-fits-all type of deal. But the thing is, I can guarantee you a lot of students fit in this category, right? Where they're just living up to the expectations that we set for them. And they have the ability to accomplish more if we just give them that opportunity. So I want to throw some numbers out there from my college, right? And these were some of the numbers that really started compelling me to get on board with this guided pathway stuff. To the right we have, well, the overall graph is the throughput level for transfer of English. And by throughput, I mean those who actually make it through college level, because that's all that's important, right? Making it through anything lower than college level English is irrelevant because it doesn't count, right? It just gets you to college level English, which you need to get through. So on the right, or as to say in the black, I have the percentage of Hispanic and African American students who are placed in each category. So 70% of those 2 levels below are African American or Hispanic, 59% 1 level below are African American Hispanic, and 49% that are placed directly in the transfer level are African American or Hispanic. We consider my school as majority Hispanic. Now if you look at the red line, you've got 2 levels below. 18% of students actually make it through college level English. 18% that are placed 2 levels below. That's how many actually make it through to graduate, essentially, right? Because if you don't make it through college level English, you're not graduating, right? 1 level below, 33%, and transfer level, 59%. So to me, this stands out because we put most of our African American and Hispanic students in the worst spot possible to make it through, right? And I know there's other factors that we can consider, but just at least take this in for a moment, right? Here's the next one. This next one really trips me out, all right? So this one is specifically looking at the throughput rates for African American students specifically, right? Students I work with every single day. So if you look at the black, it is the percent of students that make it through transfer level English. And the red is those who are, or excuse me, the percent that make it through transfer level English placed 1 level below. And the red line is the percent that make it through transfer level English who are placed in transfer level English, right? Below each of these, you've got the GPA of the students. So you've got those above a 2.6, those between a 1.9 and a 2.5, and those below a 1.9, right? Above each of those bars, you also have the BC overall throughput, right? The overall amount of students who make it through college level English, who have those GPAs, right? Does that make sense? So the thing that stood out to me the most was the fact that students with a 2.6 or higher who were placed 1 level below African American students made it through college level at 27%. You go all the way to those who are below a 1.9, who were placed in college level, they made it through at 31%. Well, that would lead me to believe that GPA is not the most important thing. That would make me think that where you're placed is the most important thing, would it not? I mean, these numbers directly contradict the fact that GPA is the biggest predictor of success. To me, it says, well, hey, put them in college level and see what happens. Let's roll the dice on this and see where we land, right? Yes?
I'm a little confused there. Doesn't placement itself have some impact on students' readiness for success?
Doesn't placement, like where they test?
Yeah, exactly. So if you have students who had a lower GPA, but they test into transfer level class, would that then suggest that they have a higher rate of succeeding?
Well,
People who had a higher GPA
Right.
tested down at the lower level.
that makes perfect sense. These numbers aren't based off the placement test. These numbers are based more so on just putting students in through multiple measures.
So you're saying students with that GPA, they were just placed into those classes and you didn't care about, you didn't look it up to see whether that was the right class.
Some of these students at the 1.9 level, yes. Some of them were placed in college level, not necessarily scoring college level on the placement test. Some did score college level. but not all.
So these placements have, whether they're placed in transfer level or one level below, in that placement process, there was no assessment about where they should be.
In some instances, yes. So it's something to consider. I'm not too big on the numbers as far as the statistics of it, but this is something that somehow they accounted for. That's all I can say about that.
It's dangerous, what you're proposing.
You're using numbers to
You're using this to tell a story, yes. And if we're not sure where these numbers are going and how these students were placed into these categories that were created to tell this narrative, then how can we understand the narrative and the I don't want to use the word truth, but how do we understand the story that you're telling us when we're not sure how these students were placed?
Sure.
So the California Accelerated Project has done a statewide study and they find numbers very similar, and they're looking at people with placement scores through multiple measures and students who just self-placed, so all three in their study, and the RP group conducted it. And in all three of those conditions, they see more students getting through, in all three.
And I should have made that more clear. A lot of these students are self-placed.
Well, so in self-place, then the student themselves are trying to decide what they're more ready for. And so people who feel more ready for that higher class, they may actually be right in that decision. And in the multiple measure system, it's not purely GPA, it's also what previous classes they took and whether they got a C or better in this class or not.
Right.
So it's not like, it's just this sounds wrong to simply say you want them to do better place in the higher class.
So there's also evidence at some community colleges where the college made a decision to remove all of the lower level math courses, and so students didn't have a choice in that case. They were just placed regardless of testing, and again they found more throughput of all students, well not of all students, but a higher throughput than in any of the other conditions.
And what about the students that were abandoned?
That's a high number, but not any less than we abandon, right?
I disagree. How do you know that that's not less?
So for example, I know that in our district, we have not more than 11% of students getting through, and they are already having a little bit more. And so I'm coming from Contra Costa, and so if we're looking at the lowest level of students placed in math, for example, we maybe are hoping to have at least, the last time I looked at the numbers, it was about 9% of our students. So if you look at the numbers for DVC, you can similarly see that we're not getting our students through.
I think one thing to keep in mind too, that I keep in mind, is that our students that come in directly from high school, presumably through the law, they have had some form of beginning algebra. pre-algebra, beginning algebra, intermediate algebra, and then a transfer level class. So if we have 600 students going into pre-algebra, as we typically do, all of those students presumably are repeating something that they have already taken before, and presumably even a whole level below something they took before in their high school. So when they come in, a lot of them too self-place into that lowest level or do not take any placement exam because they fear even taking a placement exam. A full 1/3 of our students in the lowest level did not take any placement exam, but self-examined themselves as unable, incapable of taking a higher than the lowest level of math class that we offer. I'm not confident that they are self-placing accurately. And by putting themselves in the lowest level, that slide right before, are completely compatible with our numbers at DVC. So I'm concerned that we do have a significant population that is placing themselves or being placed in the lowest level where there is the least amount of opportunity for them to get through completion. There may be a portion of those students who really do need that level of class. Sure, we need to keep that in mind and provide something for support, absolutely. But the form in which we are now currently running, operating our math classes is probably not the optimal way of placement, self-placement, whatever it is. Our students could do better through our support that lifts them into a level at which has higher success rates.
I agree with all of that. That fuel the suggestion that, oh, if we just drop the lower level classes, we'll have higher success, which was just stated right before.
So I didn't say higher success in the course.
As those other colleges are also doing to help support students, that they are showing significant gains in these numbers. Those other colleges didn't just drop off and cut them and then continue running everything as is without the lower end. That is not what happened there. That's not what will happen here. We need to rethink the way in which everything operates here. It is not small, and I think that scares a lot of people. It is an entire just standing on your left foot and way of thinking and rethinking and redesigning, and exactly as, I forget the guy that was just at the other speech, he said that basically we're operating on the operation that was operated on us. We need to stop that. So the rethinking is tough, imaginative, creative, and we need to go there. So we are not operating optimally. We need to just rethink it and lift our numbers and then congratulate ourselves on anything, any gains.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys' engagement. This is your guys' time to get it together, right? Get rolling on this thing, so I love it. And of course, I think with any numbers that are presented, there's always going to be another side to it, right? Some factors in there that, well, what if it was this or what if it was that? So I'm not saying that these numbers are necessarily concrete. I'm sure there's a way to other factors in there that aren't accounted for, basically is what I'm saying. That's with anything you ever present anywhere, right? And I will say this, I will say to the point of skipping past those lower levels, certainly I've seen students who cannot just skip to college level, right? Whether it be English or math. I've had students actually who, according to multiple measures, they place in college level, but I say no, that's not gonna happen, right? And that's particularly in the Emotion program that we have, we see that the writing's just not there. They're not gonna get through. So of course there are students that do need to start at those lower levels and work themselves up, right? But if I may throw out a bit of anecdotal evidence, I know people don't usually like it, but I like it, so I'm gonna throw it out there because I think it's important. I recently had a student who had been at Bakersfield College for about 10 years, right? He had been there for 10 years. He had almost collected 10 degrees at the time, but he was struggling with getting through math. That was his one downfall. He truly had an anxiety over it, as a matter of fact. And he had taken the pre-algebra class, failed it once, I think passed it with a C. He moved on to beginning algebra, didn't complete it, got it incomplete, but we let him go to intermediate algebra, ended up not completing beginning algebra, failed that, failed intermediate algebra, and failed it again, right? So when he comes to me and I see that this student's been here 10 years, he's got about 120 units. So he's got enough for a bachelor's degree at this point. He's about 45 years old, African-American man. He's got a job for him at the school district. All he needs is that piece of paper, right? So I decided to just roll the dice. Hey, look, man, I'm going to put you in Psych B5, which is our behavioral science statistics. Let's just roll the dice and see what happens. You got nothing to lose. Because at the point that you're taking beginning algebra, intermediate algebra, and then getting there, let's just roll the dice, right? Let's do a science experiment. So I put him in it the first time, he gets a D. But I say, it's better than you did in the other math classes, right? So I put him in the summer, I work with him, have him do tutoring, he gets an A. He gets an A grade, right? He failed beginning algebra, he failed intermediate algebra, right? Barely passed pre-algebra, but he gets an A in behavioral science statistics, right? And I think algebra and statistics are not necessarily the same thing, right? They're a little bit different in the curriculum. So of course, if he's going to be a business major or an engineering major, he's got to do that beginning algebra. I wouldn't be able to do that. But if we're talking about those social sciences or something other than business or STEM, well, should he really have to go back and do that intermediate algebra or that beginning algebra that gave him so much anxiety? Whereas behavioral science statistics put math in a way that was contextualized. Absolutely. You guys understand that. So now he's graduated. And I certainly don't regret that decision, right? So it makes me wonder how many more students are out there that are like that. Well, I'm certainly going to roll the dice and find out, right? So I want to talk a little bit about, so now we've gone over the high expectations, right? And we kind of framed the conversation of that to a certain degree. Now I want to talk about the support that was mentioned earlier. You have those high expectations, but now students need the support behind it. So this statement stands out. We provide equitable service to produce equal outcomes, right? So one thing I want to put out there, in the system that's been proposed with Meta-Majors, kind of looks like this, right? Where each student is on a Meta-Major. And that would be awesome if this were an equal world, right? But is it an equal world, right? Some students come to us with deficits, and some students are certainly privileged, right? I look at myself, I'm privileged, right? I had a great mom, right? She was always supportive of me going to school, right? Paid all my bills until I graduated, so I loved it. But I know, it was wonderful. But there's students who don't have moms out there. Right? There's students who don't have anyone out there. Plenty of them, right? Plenty of students are like that. So plenty of students come to us with deficits. So with the Meta-Major model, as I've seen it proposed, it basically provides an equal ladder for each student. But what about those students who are further behind, right? Because if we just, again, that's a rising tide lifting all ships. Certainly those students who are further behind will potentially rise in a guided pathways model, and so will everybody else. So there'll still be that disparity, won't there? Right? So we have to consider going into this guided pathways model, asking ourselves, are we perpetuating these inequities that students are coming to us with already, right? Go ahead.
No, can you dim the light? I can read it.
Oh.
It's very difficult. Especially in gray background.
It's either all or nothing, huh?
Doesn't get that like.
So I'll just kind of explain. It just shows the meta-majors and students starting off at different points, right? Where the students who are starting off the lowest already have low expectations, inadequate aid, limited support, and essentially unequal access, right? And I'm referring to usually predominantly marginalized racial ethnic groups on that ticket, right? So the question becomes, how are we including equity within our guided pathways framework, right? And that's a question that I think you guys will have to ask yourselves as you go forward, right? Because we can't just say guided pathways is equitable within itself, or it's just going to somehow magically produce equity, because I don't think it will, right? I think we have to find a way to infuse it within the way that we build it, right? So I think anytime you consider infusing equity, you have to talk about where you direct your resources, right? And what we've done at Bakersfield College is, yes, we've utilized the meta-majors because I think that concept is very important and very beneficial to all students, right? But we've also embraced the concept of affinity groups as well, right? I'm going to talk about what affinity groups are in terms of this discussion. And affinity groups in meta-majors are both guided by the framework of completion teams. Have you guys heard completion teams before? Oh, perfect. So I'll get into that.
Can you explain completion teams?
Absolutely. Who said that? Oh. So completion teams are, well, you know what? I'm going to explain it. Yeah, I'm going to get into it. But first I'll get into what our affinity groups are, just so we have a foundation. So meta-majors, of course, would be like health sciences, public safety, etc., related to your majors. Affinity groups are specific populations that have either specific needs or equitable needs, right? So veterans, foster youth, dreamers, and as what our affinity groups are going to be. Of course, at different colleges, it may be something different. So now I'll talk about the completion team and how that actually works, because I know some of you guys have heard this, some of you guys haven't. So a completion team is basically a network of student services professionals, faculty, people in different offices that have something students need, right? Who have the goodies for the students. Students need financial aid, so we've got someone in there. Students need an ed plan and guidance on what classes to take, so we have an advisor or a counselor. Students, of course, need faculty, so faculty are on board. But you also have peer mentors, you also have some admin, you also have tutors, and you also have a data coach, right? And I know that concept is not very widespread. So what a data coach is for our school, of course, we have an Office of Institutional Effectiveness, right? As a lot of schools do, or someone who does that work. But what we've done is we've empowered folks on these completion teams who can also pull data, right? Because it's not the Office of Institutional Effectiveness that's actually going to meet with students. It's us on the ground, right? It's the teachers and the student services professionals, the advisors and whatnot. So within these completion teams, there's someone who's not in the Office of Institutional Effectiveness who can pull data as it relates to their particular completion team. So for example, I'm the data coach for African American students, right? I can tell you how many are enrolled, I can tell you how many were enrolled in the fall but not matriculated to the spring, I can tell you how many have financial aid and who doesn't, who has a CSCP, who doesn't, who's an EOP&S, almost anything, right? How many units each student is in, almost everything, right? And this is data that I can actually use, right? If a student's not cleared for financial aid, well, we need to get on that, right? We need to have the guy in the financial aid who's part of that completion team call every single African American student and say, hey, let's get in here and let's fill out this paperwork, right? Or if I see a student doesn't have an educational plan, then I need to call him in and get him an educational plan, right? Him or her, right? So this completion team is just a team of folks on campus who are dedicated to a particular meta-major or a particular affinity group, and they can focus on it, right? And I'll get a little bit more deeper into that. So first I want to define some of the affinity group distinctions and some of the meta-major distinctions and why they're important, right? Of course, a meta-major, it ensures every student is within a completion team, allows more robust faculty participation in curriculum alignment, so that's of course why we want the faculty to be involved. Better alignment with the transfer institution because it's major related. More in-depth knowledge of career trajectory and industry opportunities, right? Because of course I think the faculty who have the degrees and teach in it are probably going to know the most about the opportunities in that curriculum, right? That makes sense. Now the affinity groups, big reason why we incorporated that is because there's a more concrete foundation to build relationships with students. I had a student just the other day, I said, what do you want to major in? Psychology, business, and music. All right, that's about 3 different meta-majors, right? And there's a lot of students who don't know what the heck their major is, that are just like that, right? He says he wants to just do music mainly. I said, all right, well, we'll figure it out, right? But having it just based off of a meta-major isn't quite as concrete, right? Because that major may change, or that major may not be what they're intent on actually doing, right? But of course, when you have an affinity group like a veteran, well, they'll always be a veteran, right? And there'll always be things tied to that. So it just lets the relationship building be a little bit more concrete, right? It won't change with the major. Because if they change their major, what are you going to do? Send them to another, meta-major completion team after they've just built a relationship with this particular team, right? That doesn't make sense. Targeted outreach, counseling, and service offerings, right? So, in speaking of that, one thing that I noticed is that we go to the high schools quite a bit in Bakersfield for outreach. And we do all of the matriculation services at the high schools. Well, one thing I noticed in going to the high schools, doing the assessment test, the ed plans, all of that, is that there typically weren't a lot of African American students coming to these workshops that we had at the high schools. And I couldn't figure out what was going on, right? I still don't really know. But what I was able to do is reach out to the Black student unions. We have an organization called Project Best in Bakersfield, and I was able to do some targeted outreach, right? Where I can outreach to all of them and make sure all of them are equipped with an ed plan and are comfortable with the college. And I did some other things, and I'll show that a little bit later on. But these affinity groups can also be utilized to expand our current programs, right? We talked about people wanting to get rid of the Puente program because of guided pathways. I think we should use guided pathways to enhance something like the Puente program, right? Let's turn that into an affinity group where we can reach every at-risk Hispanic student on campus, right? Let's empower that, right? So I see affinity groups as a way to expand some of our current equity programs, and I'll get into a little bit of how we've done that. And then there may already be components in place as well, right? If you've got a Puente program, you've probably got a counselor, you've probably got a faculty member, and you might have some other folks attached to that as well. So you've already got components of that completion team already in place, right? So just give them a little bit more juice and let them run, right? Does that make sense? So I want to get into a little bit of what we've been able to do with the African American Initiatives Affinity Group at Bakersfield College, right? We, of course, have an Emoja program, and we also have the African American Mentoring Program, which is, I coordinate that one. That one meets with students every other week, has a male version and a female version, and just lets students sort of voice their concerns. And it's not necessarily a club, but more of an outlet, right? I'm sure you guys have heard of Emoja before. It's a learning community at our school. But in thinking about expanding these equity programs, last thing we necessarily need is another program, right? I feel like sometimes in college we just program the heck out of students, don't we? It's just like, well, let's get a program going for it, you know? We've got a program for just about anything. I think what we need to do in terms of going forward in this Guided Pathways movement is frame these programs in a way that it's not a program where it can just be gone one day. Emoji could be gone one day, AMP could be gone one day, right? I can't imagine what would happen to AMP if I left, right? Because I've been coordinating things. These things happen at every college, right? You have someone who's been doing all the work and they're passionate, and then they leave. And everybody else is like, I don't know what that was all about, right? I don't know how to coordinate it, because they were doing something else. So instead of just having a program, we need to make this a broader effort in the mission and the work of the entire college, right? And turn it from a program to the work of the college, right? So this isn't just a learning community anymore that has 30 students. It's not just the AMP program, whoever comes, and that's it, right? We're not just operating from the state of a program. Now we have a team. Now we can focus on every single African American student on campus, right? Last year we had 800, now we have about 1,000 people. And we can see almost every component of what's going on. And we actually outreach to them. And we focus on these things. And we can be proactive. We don't have to sit and wait for them to come to us. Because they might not come to us, right? When I first started, people were like, I don't know if you're going to be able to see a lot of students because no one knew I was there. But I outreached to them. I sent emails. I sent text messages. I made phone calls. And sure enough, they came after that, right? So I think what we need to do in framing this guided pathways work is not get rid of our programs, but enhance them, right? Give them some more juice so they can be a part of guided pathways as well. Does that make sense? Yes?
I just have a question.
Sure.
I'm just trying to understand your guys' process and the way it's set up. So from what I'm understanding, for all your affinity groups, there is a completion team that they're assigned to versus a meta-major completion.
They're still the meta-majors. They're assigned to both.
They're assigned to both.
Absolutely.
But ideally, it'd be the affinity group that would reach out to those students first, because now you're duplicating work.
Sure. And I think that's okay though. I think that's okay to duplicate work, right? Especially, I mean, I can tell you with my students, if the meta-majors want to contact those students and get them an ed plan or whatever the case may be, please do, right? That's great. But I'm gonna do what I need to do to make sure that happens. And if they don't catch them, then I'm gonna catch them, right? Because there's so many students that are falling through the cracks. Even though we're duplicating work, we might have one person doing the catching, but there's still students falling, so why not have two people doing the catching, right? And we'll catch more students that way, I think. Go ahead.
I think the risk in that approach, though, is the students say they often get conflicted.
We'll punch them back, right? You're getting conflicting advice at home every day. You know, I think that's just, but that's a valid thing, right? And that does happen, without a doubt, right? I'll tell a student to do one thing, meta-majors will tell them to do another, right? And it happens. But I think the reward is worth the fallout of that. Just because I know that we're catching students that we usually used to miss, and they're getting an ed plan at least, right? Go ahead.
The other part about that, and I appreciate David's point, I'm a counselor, so I hear that, right? We know sometimes questions are different, but I think that's where us partnering together is much more, is very important. You know, if I look on STARS Grid and I see that a student I'm working with has seen a DSS counselor, then, you know, I can reach out to that DSS counselor. I think it's going to put it on us to be more proactive. And I can say, look, based on what we've talked about, this is what I'm suggesting. Why don't you go and bounce this off of, you know, so-and-so who you met with before. They, you know, have this specialization. See what they advise you. So I think that's where we're going to also have to do things differently. We're going to have to be more proactive in how we communicate with each other, and tools like, I don't know if it's Starfish or Hobson's today, but whatever the name of the tool is going to be important to helping us all communicate better, so that, you know, I know to advise the student, go bounce this off the DSS counselor, get their input, we can communicate. Let's check in with the instructors. How are they doing? How are you doing in your classes? Is that working or not working? So it's challenging, it's putting the onus on us to do that sort of communication with one another, rather than keeping the onus on the student to say, you know, now go back and talk to this other counselor, you know, and your faculty and figure it out. It's involving us more as a team.
Perfect. That's excellent, and I just want to add that is actually what's going on. I'm glad you brought that up, because I have that all the time, even amongst affinity groups, right? You have black males who are athletes. You have black males who are PNS. You have black males with disabilities. Yeah. And so, if for example, something like that were to come up, and he or she had already seen a disabilities counselor, and they suggested so and so, right? Then it'd be nothing for me to just call over and say, hey, I see this was the situation, and you might say, well, for this particular student, of course you don't want to divulge disability, but you can say, according to my opinion, this is for the best, and I'll say, okay, got it, no problem. I don't care, I shouldn't say I don't care what advice they get, I just want them to go seek that support, one way or another. It doesn't have to be from me, it can be from anybody else. And I would just have to trust that you know it's best.
You've got about 8 or 9 minutes.
Okay, no worries. I'll get the questions.
Yeah, I'm just starting. I mean, I would always have this question. Without guided pathway, what's the structure of the college? I mean, I don't see that many interaction with the counselor here, and I don't see who are the counselor and who are the counselor of my student. I wonder, without guided pathway, is there any structure in the classroom teacher? I just always wonder about it. And why we have to have that guided pathway to have us, more communicated? Can we should we have better structure to have more communication between counselors and us as teaching faculty? For example, how do they know what we teach? What's the value of our teaching? I never seen you guys to come to our classroom. I mean, that's why I always wondering, how do they know our value of our classroom? And how can they recommend a better class for this particular student? And I always feel like without this, fundamentally without this guided pathway, I thought we have to have better communication as one institution, counselors, teaching faculty, and that's what's missing. I know that's been my complaint. We have to have additional group or additional structure as guided pathway to have this better communication, or can we just have better communication without guided pathway? That's my big concern. Why we have to have one more thing to take over our entire campus? That's that's I'm still unsure about why guided pathway has to be implemented to have better communication between us. Maybe that's the starting point. I don't know.
I think guided pathways is what you're aiming. All right, it could just be a thing where you guys are working on building communication structures. It doesn't have to be this. It doesn't have to be that or whatever. It's whatever's best for your particular campus. So it could be just working on building communication. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I don't think guided pathways is a program like that we're envisioning it to be, or hearing the definitions or creating our own definitions of what guided pathway is supposed to be, but it is a framework, a tool that we can all use. And I think it's been echoed from all the speakers that we have today, including Julian here, in regards that we make it what it is. We have to define it to our institution, right? And exactly what we're using. I've not heard that sentiment before in terms of getting counselors in the classroom to know what we're teaching, but now we do, because we're having conversations about guided pathways. So if it wasn't for guided pathways, we won't know that that's a sentiment that faculty has about counselors. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily here, do these things, do guided pathways. It's let's now take a look at how we're doing in our practices as an institution, and make sure that we're helping our students, graduating them, successfully completing their goals here. So I think that's what we really need to look at. It's not necessarily here's a definition of guided pathways, but the goals that guided pathways wants us to accomplish. And then I think that will help take a look at the different models or strategies or things that we may need to look at our own institutions and see where we need to work on. It sounds like communication is what it is for DVC as well. So I think those are conversations that we're now having because Guided Pathways has brought that out, where we may not have had the opportunity to do so in the past.
Did you want to?
In listening to a lot of this too, I think we have to, I think, go back to a central thing is like, how we're doing things now isn't working for all students. And I think that's what we have to focus on. And then we have to build back from there, like, what can we do differently and how can we transform how we do things to better serve and better reach all students and get them to their success. And I think that one of the things, just using some examples today, whether it was placement of students, and all of a sudden you have English faculty or math faculty, like we have skills and knowledge around this, about what's best for students in those disciplines. But we're not necessarily then engaging broader parts of the campus in terms of a counselor's experience or in terms of disability services experiences, et cetera. And I think that when I look at your completion team, is looking at that, is it's forcing that there's the different perspectives. We all have knowledge. We all have our unique knowledge on the campus, and what people say is that those are silos. We all have those things. It's bringing that perspective that we have collectively, but students don't have access to collectively.
Right.
So it's really about bringing it to the students and really rethinking about how we reach those students. And when I listen to your thing, you're saying you're the main driver for all African American students at Bakersfield, and you just said that you have 1,000 students, African American students there now. It's like, wow. And how, where's the bandwidth and where's the team with that? I mean, so I think we have to look at.
Perfect question, and I want to get to you guys in a second, but I want to get through this real quick because I oftentimes get that question of, well, you got 1,000 students. What is your team, like 5, 6 people? How are you going to service all the students, right? It makes sense, it's a valid question. Well, you don't have to service all of those students. Well, you got to service them, but what I'm saying is there's those who have more need than others within those groups. I just want to point this out real quick. I thought this was interesting, and these are some of the numbers that I pulled as the data coach. I noticed that, and it's probably not too shocking, but students who are in their first 12 units are less successful than students who are in their attempting 30 units, right? Mm-hmm. Those students who have already completed 30 units, which is in the green, their success rates are pretty good. Their success rates are actually just as good as every other student at our college, African American students. So African American students who have 30 units or more are doing just as well as everybody else. Well, then I'm thinking, okay, well, looks like the students in their first 12 units are the ones that are struggling. Let's reach out to those specifically, right? And when we reach out to those specifically, there's about 220. Okay, now we're cooking with some juice. Now we can roll with 220 because we can't roll with 1,000, right? That's just going to drive me nuts and, a lot of overtime. But 200 we can work with. Okay, then we take those 200 and we break it down by who has the need. Who is it clear for financial aid? 80. Okay, perfect. That's 80 phone calls somebody needs to make to get those students in, right? Who doesn't have an education plan? We'll say 90, right? So that's 90 students I actually need to meet with, right? To do that educational plan. Of course, the doors stay open for all students, but that's who I'm outreaching to because I can see where the issues arise, right? And I can also, I'll just get to this. So you really whittle it down. So in the spring 2018, we had 783 African American students. 414 of them completed less than 30 units. 136 of them started fall or summer 2017, and 89 students started spring 2018. So January 2018, my job is to reach out to 89 students and make sure they have everything they need because they just got here, right? And they know just as much as anyone who just got there, right? In a sense. So that's who I'm actually going to target. Last thing I just want to get to is that this partnership with the other affinity groups is really advantageous because what we've been able to do is I have the 14, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17 African American students enrolled in EOP&S, right? You can see it shot up here, right, tremendously, because this is when our team started focusing on it, right? Because when I first looked at EOP&S and I saw that there were only 60 students, I'm like, wait a minute, I've got the numbers here. And I saw that there's 200 and something students that started first time, and I know my students, and I know the majority of them qualify for EOP&S, so we need to get on this, right? And so I was able to send a list of those students to the person in EOP&S. They were then able to tell me who qualifies, send the list back. I was able to call each student on the list and get them in to enroll in EOP&S. And that's an extra book voucher. And that's an extra person on their team who cares about their success, right? I don't care how many people you got advising you. Somebody's got your back. If you've got more people having your back, then that's always a good thing, right? We were also able to increase the amount of African American students enrolled in Summer Bridge, right? The thing is, sometimes we already have good programs, right? But the students who need it the most aren't always utilizing those good programs, right? Our Summer Bridge is incredible, right? EOP&S is, what, an 8-year, it's been around forever. And it actually does work. They have good results. So if my job, if I can get more students in EOP&S and more students in Summer Bridge, guess what? They're going to do my job for me, right? They're going to help me get the results and make me look good the whole way, right? So that can be a big part of it. Lastly, I just want to go over some of the success that we've had in this, right? So getting students in those programs and having students work with completion teams, at least for African American students, has helped as far as the English B1A completion rate for first-time African American students, right? It's doubled each year, right? And I can guarantee you, I shouldn't guarantee, no, I'm going to guarantee, I guarantee you our numbers for this year are going to be through the roof, right? Because I know that we've got more students in English B1A, and I know they've got the support behind it, right? So just watch. Follow up with me. I'll let you know how it goes, but I'm pretty confident in that. So I just want to leave you with these final thoughts, okay? And these are the things that I believe that are the most important in this work. First thing is, you can't have equity without high expectations, right? A lot of times our students have had low expectations their whole life. And that's a big part of the problem, right? Is that we don't expect them to do much. We don't expect them to graduate, right? So if we can shift our expectations to now have high expectations, I think they'll meet us where we are at. High expectations is only half the battle. Students need our support. You brought it up earlier in the back, is that we can't just have high expectations and say, all right, I expect you to complete college level math and English. Good luck. I'll see you next year. You know, we then need to follow up on that. We need to then make sure they're going to tutoring. We need to make sure that we're meeting with them and we're building relationships with them. And that brings me to my final point, because I feel like it's the most important, but it doesn't get shouted enough. This work is all about relationships, right? This completion team model and these meta-majors and these affinity groups, whatever, it's only a means to the end of building relationships with students. Because in the end, the faculty that build relationships with those students are going to have more success. The student services people who build relationships with those students are going to have the more success. So within this framework of a completion team, where a student comes back to a particular person in financial aid or in counseling, well, that's going to help them build a relationship, right? Who's the counselor here? So you know, sometimes, you know, during drop-in time, you know, a student might see like 8 different counselors over the course of however many times they go to counseling, 8 times, right? And you're always seeing someone different, and you do get that different advice sometimes. But you also don't have the opportunity to build a relationship. And that's what student services is about, is building relationships. So essentially, I think all of this work and all of these meta-majors or affinity groups are just a means to get to the end of building relationships. So, yes?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think, you know, for me, the big elephant in the room on that is that we have, what, 60, 70% of our faculty, counselors, are adjuncts who, you know, they can't live in the Bay Area on one class or just teaching at one college. They're teaching 4 colleges, so then we're asking them to put that onto their back, the support the students too, when they're trying to teach at 4 different schools with 4 different systems. Counselors, our classified staff half the time are in intern positions for 6 months at a time, so you can't. The problem is that sometimes institutionally, at least I feel that we don't have the ability to develop those relationships and give this support because there's just so much transition and movement and stuff like that. And that's something I think we need to really figure out. And I know that's a statewide problem a lot of times too.
That's excellent, though. That's excellent.
Last question, and then we'll wrap up.
It was just a point. I think the other piece of relationships, though, is that it helps us build relationships with each other. And that goes back to Tori's point, is that we don't often get out of our silos. We don't connect with each other. We have the department chair from art come in and talk with us in counseling about their courses and what's appropriate and what's not. But I think it's also really important that we build those relationships with each other so that if there is turnover, I know who to connect that student with on that team, right? Now it's not all built on the one person that student had a connection with and that person is gone or strapped or, freeway flyer. It's now there's a whole team of us and we can tap into that more effectively. So I see guided pathways as it's just an opportunity. It's not like anything else the state has ever done. The state says you have 3SP, here's the money, here's how you access it, and here are all the rules you have to follow. Here's equity, same thing. Here's BSI, same thing. And this is asking us and giving us the impetus to reimagine how we provide education and how we partner with each other and with students to help them reach the goals that they want to achieve. And that's what makes this really exciting and also really hard to wrap your head and your hands around sometimes because we really are building it while we're flying it. And it's very squishy that way.
Thank you for that. I love that. Great question. The time here, so thank you again, Julie. That's great. As we wrap up this time, I want you to think about the wonderful exchange and questions that you all had. Take those questions with you to the afternoon sessions because, I've been working with statewide around this issue, and I worked with one particular college that wrote a paper. 2 philosophy professors wrote a paper against guided pathways. I think you know which college I'm talking about. And I worked with that college through 4 different sessions, and just recently they have moved into an area where they loosened up because of what you said earlier. There's this tendency to believe, because we're so used to the state saying something, do it. The state's giving you money, do it, but do it like this. This is different. So when I told this college, and they were struggling with what was said earlier so passionately about this idea of where does guided pathways come from, and where's that evil money coming from, and what's the origin of all that, right? So when I said to them, you don't have to call it guided pathways. You don't have to use Meta-Majors. I just changed everything. And now they're working on it because they care about their students. That's what this is about. That's what it should be about. Now, we know, not joking, we should not joke ourselves. There is a statewide effort. This has been unlike anything. And so when I work with some college folks that say, I'm just used to getting a grant, what the deliverables are, and then we could do it. This is different. You're creating it. You're ingenuiting it. And with your knowledge of your students, it will be what it needs to be for your community and your campus. So I hope you'll join these afternoon sessions with that mindset. And I love the ideas that have already been shared about breaking the silos and building new relationships that you haven't had before. I mean, I've been working with some colleges that are trying to rethink this idea of having a division, a unit, a way that we describe ourselves as being separate, that retention happens over there, that counselor is the one that's in charge of student success. No, it's all of our roles, right? And keeping in mind what was said earlier, some of us have to get to 3 or 4 other colleges because the majority of the state, the majority of the students of color and the poor are being taught by and supported by adjunct part-time people. So that is a challenge. It's not going to go away because of this. But in lieu of that, we're going to have to address that. But it can only be, I think, addressed when all these different various points of view get put in a room and people work together. We're going to begin that today. So thank you.